Hi, Steve here with my weekly diet update. Okay, so it looks like I took off a couple pounds this week and my body fat percentage is still 23, but it looks like I lost like half a pound of fat mass. So I'm just gonna keep doing what I'm doing. I thought I was actually gonna put on weight this week because I kind of overate a couple times out of sorrow because my favorite movie star died, Sir Roger Moore, who played in like 7 of my favorite movies of all time from 1973 till 1985. He lived till he was 89, I think, 1927 to 2017. So this week I'll be showing my Roger Moore movie collection. Mostly Bond movies, some non-Bond movies in there too. I'll start off with those. Here is Cross Plot. This is sort of a thriller, drama, action movie that came out in the late 60s before Roger Moore played Bond. And this is a fun little thriller. It has some comedy in there too. So I recommend that one if you're a Roger Moore fan or a James Bond fan in general. It kind of has a James Bond vibe to it. Here's another one, Gold. I think this came out in the mid-70s during his run as Bond. And this one is directed by Peter Hunt. So that combined with Roger Moore being in it, it really has a James Bond vibe. It's about some crooked gold tycoons that want to flood a mine to manipulate the price of gold, kind of like Goldfinger, I guess. It's been a long time since I've seen it. But Roger Moore is in there. He's like a mine manager. It's in Africa, so there's some good scenery. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember I enjoyed it. It had another movie with a kind of a James Bond vibe. Have the VHS of that one too. Here is Roger Moore in Folks. And this is an action thriller, kind of in the same vein as Die Hard, but it came out a few years before Die Hard. Roger Moore is some rich dude that's an underwater expert, and he has his team go save the day. Anthony Perkins from Psycho is the villain in here, and he hijacks a big oil rig for ransom. I think he's gonna blow it up or something, and Roger Moore and his team go to save the day. This one doesn't really have a James Bond vibe, but it's a good suspense, Die Hard type movie. That's Folks. Here is The Quest with Jean-Claude Van Damme, directed by Jean-Claude Van Damme. I think it was the first movie he ever directed. And it's pretty good. It has a nice look visually and has some good acting. I really enjoy this movie. I know it gets slagged off a lot, but I think all of the elements that put this movie together are really good. I don't think how they came together was so perfect, and I guess Roger Moore didn't enjoy making this movie, and Van Damme and him didn't get along, but I didn't think it really showed on the movie. I really liked Roger Moore in this. He kind of reminded me of the same character as in Folks. But he's more of a ladies' man in this, so it's good to see Roger Moore back as a ladies' man. And he's in some of the same locations as the Man with a Golden Gun, so it's good to see Roger Moore back in Thailand. And this is pretty much a remake or another adaptation of Bloodsport, but set in the 20s. Yeah, so I like Bloodsport and I like Roger Moore, so those two things come together in this. The Quest. Here's a movie I bought when all the video stores were going out of business for cheap. It's called The Enemy. I don't really remember much about this. I just bought it because Roger Moore was in it. This came out in 2001. So it was one of the later movies he was in. Maybe I should give it another try. I think I fell asleep through it, but anyway, like I said, I just bought it because Roger Moore was in it. Roger Moore was like the guy I always went to. If I ever go to IMDb, the first name I look up is Roger Moore to see if he's coming out in any new movies. He was my favorite movie star. I'll probably be on Internet Movie Database a lot less now. I know he was old and he was not going to be in any new movies. he was touring around doing speeches and signing books up until the end, I believe, but I don't think he's been in too many movies lately, but I still always go check. I know Sean Connery's not in anything else, and those are two of my favorite living, those were two of my favorite living actors, just because of Bond, and I grew up with Bond movies. Anyway, but on to the Bond movies. Like I said, Roger went from 73 all the way until 1985, which was a long span, and Bond movies really evolved during that time. You kind of think of it all as the same style, but they went all the way from the classic James Bond feel, like late 60s, early 70s, all the way to 1985, which had more of a modern feel. And they all had Roger Moore, and he sort of evolved along the way too. I know people think he's always a goofball, always funny, but he sort of started off that way. But I noticed towards the end he got pretty serious. I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with that, but I think Roger does funny good and also serious. I think he might do serious a lot better than some of the other Bonds. But people kind of overlook that because a lot of the movies are pretty goofy towards the end. I like them all. I'll defend all the movies, but that's just my take on it. But anyway, Live and Let Die started off with this. Okay, so Guy Hamilton returned to direct Live and Let Die, Roger Moore's first Bond movie. Guy Hamilton had directed the previous Bond movie, Diamonds Are Forever. And then back in '64, he directed Goldfinger. So this was his third Bond movie to direct. And people say the silliness in Bond started with Roger. I think it started with Guy Hamilton. Because if you watch Diamonds Are Forever, Sean Connery's last movie, it was pretty silly and light compared to the one before it, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And even Goldfinger, I thought, sort of had was sort of light. But anyway, on to Roger. Yeah, this is the first time you see Roger. Quite a ladies' man, just like Sean was. Yeah, I like how Roger interacts with Felix in here, and M, and Moneypenny, and all the ladies, of course, and the villains in here. This movie probably has the best villains out of any Bond movie, I think. And the villain Kananga, I think, is one of the more overlooked Bond villains. And there are quite a few good henchmen in this movie. Like, usually you get one good henchman per movie. This has a few henchmen that are pretty memorable, especially Baron Samedi, the voodoo guy, and then Teehee, the guy with the claw hand. And there's a good fight on a train between Teehee and Bond in this towards the end. And then this movie had some stunts in there. I know kids like all these Fast and Furious movies these days, but this movie had like a solid 15 minutes of action, boat chase, escaping alligators, some really good stunts, boat chases, jumping onto the land, jumping over bridges. One scene in this movie actually has a double-decker bus do a 180. Anyway, so Live and Let Die, good one. Second one, 1974. This came out only a year later. I think this is one of the lower budget Bond films for the time. A lot of people think it shows, but I don't really think so. I think there were a lot of good sets in here. The cinematography and everything in here is really good. One scene, there's actually a car chase through Bangkok, Thailand in the 70s. During broad daylight, and there's all kinds of traffic out. There's a nice little car chase in this movie, though. And yeah, Roger Moore back for a second. This is Guy Hamilton directing again, but surprisingly, it's not as light as his previous movies. I think this one's a little bit darker than the other Guy Hamilton movies. And this is Roger Moore at his darkest, I believe. He was really crabby and grumpy in this movie. Still likable, but I mean, he was. This is the most serious I've seen him, and I think the movie overall is pretty goofy, and there's some goofy scenes, and there's a lot of comic relief with Sheriff J.W. Pepper. But yeah, but overall he played this a lot darker than his other movies. And then the villain in here, of course, is probably one of my favorite villains. Another one of my favorite actors who has passed away, Christopher Lee. He plays the villain in this. Francisco Scaramanga, the man with the golden gun. And he has a beautiful island in Thailand with a fun house in it. And there's a duel between Bond and Scaramanga in this crazy fun house at the end. I really like this movie. I would always put it towards the bottom of my list of Roger Moore movies, but my wife and I actually watched the first two movies yesterday, this one and the previous Live and Let Die. We're doing a marathon this weekend, and actually I think I kind of like it better than Live and Let Die. Live and Let Die was always one of my favorite Rogers, but after watching them back to back, I think this time around I like this one a little bit more. My opinion always changes though. This one's got to be my favorite, if not tied for first. The Spy Who Loved Me from 1977. There was a little gap between The Man with the Golden Gun and this. This one was 77, so there's a little 3-year hiatus. Came back with a bang. This is probably regarded by most one of the best Bond movies. I think it is the best as far as visually and all the stunts, and I don't know, this whole movie feels like a comic book, just like the way it's filmed and so much action. The story progresses so fast, and the plot's really over the top and silly. People think Moonraker's plot is silly. This is equally as silly as Moonraker. But and it's directed by the same director as Moonraker, Lewis Gilbert, who had previously directed You Only Live Twice back in the 60s with Sean Connery. A lot of his movies have the similar plot. This one, Roger Moore, is just so cool. When I was a kid, like 6 years old, at the public library, we could check out movies for free, like VHS tapes. And my mom would let me rent a couple of movies or check out a couple of movies every week. And I think every week I would check this one out over and over and watch this movie over and over. When I was a kid, Jaws is in here, the best henchman. A lot of good fights between Jaws and Bond in here. Bond hooks up with a lot of ladies in this one, of course. The bad guy in here, Stromberg's obsessed with the sea, and he wants to build a new civilization under the sea in a city called Atlantis that he's creating, and he wants the Russians and the US to blow each other up and destroy the world above the surface so we could have a new and beautiful world beneath the sea. So it's a pretty silly plot, but I liked it. And yeah, the villain, I think he feels a lot like Blofeld in the previous movies. They couldn't use the Blofeld name at this point, but I think if they would have, this would have been Blofeld. The funny thing about Stromberg, the villain, is he had webbed hands, and I never noticed that until recently. But back in the day, maybe VHS didn't have good resolution, so I never noticed that. Anyway, I can't. I'm sure there's more to say about this, but I'm trying to get through this video here. Okay, then on to Moonraker in 1979, the year I was born. That might be why this is my favorite. I'm sorry, I know this one gets slagged off a lot, but this is my favorite. I actually saw it after this one. This one was always my favorite, but I think over the years I've come to love this one the most. James Bond in outer space, at least the last half of the movie. This is Lewis Gilbert once again directing. This is essentially the same movie as The Spy Who Loved Me, but rather than the ocean, it's space. Hugo Drax is the villain, and he wants to essentially play out the story of Noah's Ark, take a bunch of perfect physical specimens up to space and destroy the Earth, and then repopulate the Earth with his perfect human specimens. So this plot is really out there. The first half of the movie plays out like any classic Bond movie. It gets silly a couple times, but overall nothing really over the top until the end. But I would argue that the end of the movie really isn't that outrageous. It's pretty grounded compared to most sci-fi movies. It has a sci-fi feel, of course. There are laser guns, space battles between astronauts with jetpacks. But overall, it felt pretty grounded. It felt like a Bond movie in space to me. It didn't feel like a sci-fi movie with Bond in there. It felt like a James Bond movie in space. But anyway, I like Roger Moore in this. Charming as ever. He gets as many ladies as ever. He reunites with Jaws again, so there's some good fights between James Bond and Jaws. The girl in here, I think her name's Louis Childs, the actress. She's probably one of my favorite Bond girls. She plays Dr. Holly Goodhead. So Dr. Goodhead, I really liked her. Both appealing to the eye, and I thought her character was pretty good. This was in the 70s, so it was before all that feminism was shoved down your throat. But for back then, she was a pretty capable character. She was really on equal footing with Bond. Like, she's one who knew how to fly the spaceship and operate all the tech stuff. Yeah, not only outer space, but I think the highlight of this movie is all the nice, beautiful scenery in this. There's a lot of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and then Venice, Italy. Anyway, I could go on for days about this. It's really goofy in some parts, but then some parts of this movie are really dark. I kind of like the contrast in this movie. A lot of people say it can't make up its mind if it wants to be silly or serious, but I kind of like the contrast. It goes from silly to serious, so you never really know what's going to happen in this. For Your Eyes Only, from 1981, with Roger Moore, his fifth movie, and this one debuted the director John Glenn, who had previously edited a lot of the Bond movies before this, and his editing is beautiful, especially in Moonraker. Yeah, but this movie, all the John Glenn movies are the business. A lot of people call him the workman's director, like he just goes and gets the job done really efficiently. But I think they're really creative too. I really like John Glenn movies. He directed, did he direct 4? No, he actually directed 5 Bond movies, starting with this one, all consecutively. No other director has ever done that. He was growing up through the Bond movies. He had been a second unit director, I believe, and an editor before. So a lot of the people working on these movies just graduated into directing, like Peter Hunt with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But yeah, this one is where it started to get serious again. Although it's the same Roger, the same lovable, light Roger from the other movies. Yeah, the movie itself is a lot darker. It feels more like a Cold War thriller with some action in there. It's still a Bond movie with a lot of over-the-top stunts, chases, pretty girls. But overall, it had more of a serious tone. I think it's sort of the sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. A lot of references to that movie in here. Yeah, For Your Eyes Only. And then Roger Moore's 6th movie, Octopussy, from 1983. The same year as Return of the Jedi. That would have been a good year to go see movies. It actually came out the same time as Never Say Never Again. So these movies came out the exact same time in '83. I wish I would have been able to go to the theaters then. This was from a different production studio, with Sean Connery returning as Bond. This one, the usual official Eon production with Roger Moore. I love both of these movies, but I'm gonna have to give the edge to Octopussy. I hate to say that because I really love this movie, but it kind of is anticlimactic. Towards the end of the movie, it kind of gets blah. The first half of this movie is great. This movie is good all the way through. Roger Moore at his best. He's starting to get older, but I mean, he's still as nimble as ever and as suave as ever. I know people slag him off. He gets too old in these. I think he's around 55, 56 in this, but man, he is really nimble for a 56-year-old dude. And he's a big dude too. He's like 6'1". He seems really nimble and youthful for an old dude in this. Yeah, this one has this is probably the second best action movie ever made. I'd say Commando is the best action movie ever made, and this is the second. The first half of the movie is typical Bond stuff, a little action thrown in. But man, the second half of this movie is up there with any 80s action movie. And towards the end of this movie is where you really see Roger serious. I haven't ever seen him as serious as in this movie. It is really frantic towards the end there. What else? The villains in here are pretty good and kind of underrated. You never hear about Kamal Khan or General Orlov. But those are probably two of the best villains, and you don't really hear about them that much. I like the little back and forth with Bond and Kamal Khan. He's always one-upping Kamal, just like Sean Connery did with Goldfinger back in the 60s. But and then Gobinda, the henchman in here, is pretty cool. Kind of just like a typical Jaws henchman. This is another one that has a lot of good henchmen, a lot of memorable henchmen, just like Live and Let Die. This has Mishka and Grishka, the knife-throwing twin brothers, the circus act. And then it has Gobinda and the yo-yo guy, the guy with the razor blade yo-yo. So there are a lot of good fights, a lot of good escapist action in this movie. Roger's always on the run, always trying to get someone, always running away from someone. Yeah, that's about all I can think about that one. Okay, here's A View to a Kill, Roger Moore's final movie, 1985. John Glenn once again directs it. This one's near and dear to my heart. It's one of the only Bond locations I've been to in real life, San Francisco. I kind of want to go back to San Francisco and scout out some of the locations where this movie was filmed, but I have a wife and baby, and we don't have a lot of time to do stuff. My daughters probably wouldn't care for that much. But sometimes if I get some free time, I like to go check them out, because I'm never going to go to Europe or England or Asia or anywhere. But anyway, A View to a Kill. I love this movie. This is one that gets a lot of hate too. Oh, Roger's too old. Oh, he's an old goat. Again, he is, I think, close to 60 in this. I forget if he's 57 or 59 in this movie. He does look a lot older in this than Octopussy. I don't know how he aged in 2 years. Or he just looks a lot different. He doesn't look bad. He just looks a lot different. I think he may have had cosmetic surgery or something on. But anyway, but he seems just as nimble and quick-witted as ever in this. So I would have been happy if he did 3 more Bond movies into his 60s. But then we would have never had Timothy Dalton, and I really like Timothy Dalton. Anyway, yeah, this movie, John Glenn once again, it's pretty silly, pretty wacky, pretty out there. But then again, it's very serious as well. There's a lot of dark spots in this movie. Max Zorin, the villain in this movie, played by Christopher Watkins, just a crazy madman. He's like an even crazier version of Donald Trump. He's kind of the same character as he played in Batman Returns. He played Max Schreck in Batman Returns. In this, he's Max Zorin. And he pretty much the same plot as Goldfinger. Max Zorin wants to blow up Silicon Valley, so the price of microchips or silicone will go up and it'll make him richer. This is a lot like a remake of Goldfinger. It's similar to Goldfinger in many ways, which is good. Yeah, a lot of good action scenes in this and a lot of pretty ladies. What else? A henchwoman here, Mayday, played by Grace Jones. That femme fatale type, crazy, villainous, kind of similar to Zinnia Onatop from GoldenEye, or Fatima Blush from Never Say Never Again. Yeah, once again, a lot of good stunts, practical stunts in this movie. Hollywood babe of the time, Tanya Roberts, played the Bond girl in here. A lot of people slag her off and say she's annoying. James! Yeah, she didn't really bother me that much. She's actually not as worthless as people make her out to be. Like, she puts up a pretty good fight towards the end. And she's a geologist. She has a nice house in San Francisco anyway. So yeah, so Roger Moore in his last James Bond movie, A View to a Kill. Love it, just like I love all of them. Like I say, Moonraker is probably my favorite, but Spy Who Loved Me is right up there. I don't know, it's hard for me to say because I like all of these. The Sean Connery movies, I love all of those. Yeah, anyway, so that's my Roger Moore movie collection. Rest in peace, Sir Roger Moore. I usually don't do stuff like this, but I feel like, oh, he was my favorite movie star, so I'll go back to doing video game stuff. I'm gonna run out of video game stuff to do, and I don't think I'm gonna hit my goals with this diet before I run out of video games to talk about. So I'll probably end up talking about different things. Anyway, so I'll see you next week. Bye.